Hi there, welcome to today's video where we're going to be discussing buying in ready-to-fruit substrate blocks. So there's a variety of different mushroom substrates that growers use, and it's really one of the most important parts of the process. If you don't get your substrate right, you're not going to end up with mushrooms at the end of the growing process. It's going to be a lot of headaches and you're going to waste a lot of time and money producing moldy bags. What is it that it takes to make a good substrate? Well, it needs to be mainly full of a carbon-rich material that's got a lot of cellulose, hemicellulose and lignin in. This is the main food source for most mycelium to feed off of. But in addition to that, you also need other aspects of the substrate to be correct. So you need to have a decent amount of nitrogen in the substrate as well to get decent yields. You also need some minerals, things like potassium, calcium, magnesium. These are all very important. And luckily for most substrates, those are provided with your raw ingredients, whether you're using straw or whether you're using sawdust and soy hulls or maybe alfalfa. All of these ingredients can be mixed together to provide the right raw nutrition for your mushrooms to grow. And in addition to that, you need that substrate to be clean. You need an absence of competing organisms that might otherwise try to outcompete your mycelium. So you can see there's a lot of moving parts to this, and getting it right is important. It's one of the most tricky things for new mushroom growers to establish. So we've made a whole video that goes into even more detail on mushroom substrates, and I'll link that up in the description for you below. But today we're talking about ready-to-fruit substrate blocks, and what exactly are they? Well, really it's just about buying in substrate at this point where it's already fully colonized with healthy mycelium. So all you need to do is place that colonized bag in the fruiting environment for the mushrooms to start growing. You don't need to go through the process of making your substrate, bagging it and nurturing it through the colonization phase. And this is not a new idea. This is something that's been going on in the mushroom industry for 50 or 60 years now. The large commercial mushroom farms usually are not making their own substrate. They're simply buying it in from a substrate producer. And if you think about it, this is really quite an effective and efficient way of doing it. You have people that specialize in certain parts of the production line, and the end grower is simply just doing that final phase. And not just large companies that do this either. These days you'll find lots of smaller growers are also choosing to buy their substrate in and focus on that final stage. And there's an interesting company in New York called Smallhold. Check them out. They do a system where they send the blocks to ready-made fruiting rooms positioned usually inside of restaurants, or could be any other sort of urban setting, and they're just sending the blocks, putting them in the fruit environment for people to grow. So it's a really interesting idea, and we want to get into discussing, looking at this, what are the advantages and disadvantages of doing that in a little bit more detail, and also what types of people this really works well for.
So on to advantages when it comes to buying in ready-to-fruit substrate then. Now, so the first advantage I wanted to bring to your attention is this: the use of space. You can make better use of space at your farm by buying in ready-to-fruit substrate. So think about it. Normally you would have 3 different stages, so the mixing, incubation and fruiting, and all of those need different space at your farm. So if you dedicate the first 2 to the fruiting space, you will be able to fruit more mushrooms as a total on your farm, of course. Now, this might not be the only reason to do so when it comes to space. What you can also choose to do is buy in blocks of varieties that have a longer incubation period. Shiitake comes to mind, for instance, and you can focus on simpler species to grow with a faster incubation period. And that means, for instance, you do the oyster in-house, but you buy in shiitake. Another reason along similar lines would be if you want to grow maitake, but you don't necessarily want to get into the minutiae of the technique there because they are tricky to grow, then you might choose to buy those blocks in and then grow your own oyster mushrooms, but still fruit maitake to sell on the farmers markets, for instance. So those reasons, I've seen farmers do this and it makes complete sense to me. So then another good reason for buying in ready-to-fruit substrate is just convenience, right? So if you're just starting off and you want to build confidence and you have a fruiting room and you're ready to start growing, the exciting part of the process, but you still need to dial in some of the growing parameters, it makes complete sense to just get to that end of the business by simply fruiting, finding your customers, building confidence, and that means buying in your ready-to-fruit substrate bills. Now, I've seen this in play as well when it comes to restaurants, for instance, who are just interested in the mushrooms. They're not interested in the rest of the process. They just want to make use of the freshest mushrooms they can get. In fact, we are very proud to supply a chain of hotels from here. We supply 7 of their restaurants with ready-to-fruit substrate bales. We've done so for years and years, and they love it. They love using those fresh mushrooms in their kitchen and passing on the best dishes to their customers in turn. Now, another reason that I wanted to bring to your attention, another good reason for buying in ready-to-fruit substrate is this: you can benefit from more experienced growers. So growers like us, we've been doing this for well over a decade, and we've learned a lot along the way, and we know how to produce produce good ready-to-fruit substrate. So that's one good reason. Another one can be linked to other people's experience, like I said, but also their investments made. So if you have a large farm that can have a large output of ready-to-fruit substrate, you can pass on benefits like sourcing your ingredients, right? So sourcing in bulk comes with storage issues. You need to have a place to store it, but it also comes with advantages in terms of better prices, and you can pass this on to customers. So for you as the user of ready-to-fruit substrate, these things can be massive. So you can benefit from experience as well as often lower costs. And that's not all. Lots and lots of people who produce ready-to-fruit substrate love supporting their customers. Not everybody does that, but lots of people do. So if you've got a good supplier, this is a clear benefit as well. So it could also be that you've got a thriving farm and all of a sudden there's a spike in demand and you want to meet that demand. You don't want to let a potential customer down. So what you could do is skip a large part of the curve and just get to the fruiting, provided you've got the space. Now, the other thing that might happen is that you encounter a production issue, but you still want to keep supplying your customers. You don't want to disappoint them. And in those cases, it does make sense to buy in ready-to-fruit substrate and focus on sorting out any production issues that you might have in the mixing or in the incubation stage. So the next reason for buying substrate in is a big one, and that's this. You can get access to more varieties and you don't need to every time meet that learning curve of what it takes to grow that specific variety. So think about it. I already mentioned maitake, that could be trickier. You might want to start out with oysters, which is relatively simple to get right. So if you focus on that, but you want to sell more and offer more to your customers, then it might just make sense to buy in lion's mane, king oyster, maitake, shiitake, and then just fruit your own oyster mushrooms. It's a perfect legit way of running your mushroom farm and still offering a really wide choice to your customers. So in summary then, by buying in ready-to-fruit substrate, you can skip a lot of the hard work, you can skip a lot of learning curves as well, and you can focus on just the fun part of growing mushrooms, and that is fruiting them, and then you can go out and sell them, of course. Now, let's look into some of the disadvantages as well. Of course, we want to provide a whole picture to this, and the main disadvantages that I can think of is shipping costs. It can be really expensive to ship mushroom substrate because bales like this can weigh quite a bit. This is 13 kilograms or so. And if you think about this, if we need to send this to the Outer Hebrides off the west coast of Scotland, that will cost a lot of money and make it probably prohibitively expensive for the grower in the Outer Hebrides. And similarly in the States, if I were to be a substrate producer in mainland US and I need to ship something to Prudhoe Bay in Alaska, that might just not work out economically. So that's one disadvantage that I can think of. And the other one is this: it does take a little bit of cash flow, of course. It does require you to invest a bit of money ahead of time before you get your substrate, and then depending on what species you've got, you need to wait for it to fruit and then make the sale, of course, to get that money back. So I thought it'd be worth pointing that out to you. You do need to have a little bit of cash to fund growing your mushrooms in this way. So just to provide a bit of balance, I'm not saying that everyone should be buying in ready-to-fruit substrate, right? Because many of us enjoy doing the whole of the process and all of the steps along the way, and it can be really satisfying. The purpose of this video really is just to make people aware and also to look into which type of growers this would work for. So let's look into that now.
So clearly one type of grower that this really works well for is anyone that's restricted with their space. So perhaps you only have a small space, or maybe space is very expensive where you are. You're going to be able to output a lot more mushrooms from that space if you use it entirely for fruiting and you just remove the whole incubation stage from your growing process. So that's a huge advantage for anyone that's in a small space or anywhere that's expensive, or anyone that just really wants to focus on producing the mushrooms. So that's kind of another category of grower, really. Someone that just wants to focus on the fruiting and the sales of the mushrooms instead of spending their time researching and understanding the substrate production, which can be quite a time-intensive process. Really, this is also very suitable for new growers. Anyone that wants to just get started on this in the quickest, simplest way possible without the steeper learning curve that comes from producing reliable substrate. This is one way that you can just cut that learning process dramatically and go straight to having fresh mushrooms. And then if you are interested in making your own substrate, you can learn that more slowly alongside over time whilst you're already in production and already starting to build up customers and starting to sell mushrooms. It also will make a lot of sense if you really want to focus on making value-added products. So maybe you're just really interested in making mushroom jerky or medicinal mushrooms or tinctures or some other food-based product, and that's really where you want to focus your time on. You don't really want to be spending a lot of time perfecting your substrate production when you could just buy the substrate and get the mushrooms and focus on that product that you really want to make out the other end of the process. There are also some scenarios where maybe your own production is just more expensive than it would be to buy in a block that's already made. So perhaps you live somewhere where transport costs or raw materials or spawn is just really hard to source. or maybe you're just not having much luck with your production. It's actually just costing you a lot of money to get the few bags that are actually working out well for you. Maybe in those scenarios it'll work out financially for you to just order the substrate in and fruit the mushrooms from it. It might well be the cheaper option. Now, another area where we think there's a lot of potential is also for other food growers. So maybe it's a community supported agriculture scheme or homesteaders who want to add another crop to what they're already growing. It's much easier to just have a fruiting room that you put substrate in and crop the mushrooms than it is to have a whole production space and an incubation area and a lot more of the learning to go through as well. So perhaps if you just want to focus on adding one extra crop to something that you're already growing, this would be a better option as well. And one that I'm really excited about is charities and social enterprises. So any organization that's working with people and trying to provide therapeutic or ecotherapy benefits to the people that they're working with, this is a lovely activity to integrate into the work that you're already doing. You can just position a fruiting room amongst the other activities that you're doing, and there's a whole bunch of tasks for people to learn and find a lot of enjoyment and benefit from just from the fruiting stage, which is going to be a lot easier to get people into than the substrate production, but maybe that's something you add on further on down the line. Anyway, so these are a whole bunch of different people who buying substrate in is probably a better option than trying to make it themselves. So we've looked at all these advantages and disadvantages and who it works well for, but if you're interested in actually getting substrate, where do you start with that?
So when it comes to the next step here for you, if you're interested in buying ready to fruit substrate, is simply by looking around and seeing who's ready to supply you. So I've seen lots of different examples in different countries. The main ones in the US, for instance, are Earth Angel Mushrooms and Maine Cap and Stem. They seem to be doing a great job at supplying substrate to growers. Over here in the UK, what we're looking to do is expand our substrate sales. So what we'll be doing here from our farm are lovely bales like these, oyster mushrooms. There'll be yellow ones, brown ones, blue ones, and white ones. Now, this is interesting though. At the time of recording, we're expecting a huge delivery of biodegradable, compostable bags, and this is quite a new thing in mushroom cultivation. Often it's plagued by plastic like these, and we'll be growing all of our bales in fully compostable biodegradable bags, and that's a lovely advantage that you can benefit from, of course, as well. Now, we won't only be supplying oyster mushroom bales. We've got a wide variety on offer, so we'll also be selling substrate like shiitake, lion's mane, as well as king oyster, and we won't be growing those at our farm here. We've struck a lovely partnership with guys at Dart Valley Fungi, which is just about 2 miles down the road from here, and in fact one of the guys who runs it is on our low-tech mushroom farming course and community, and that's really great. So he's been stepping into this spot, doing different species, different varieties, and we can now benefit from that, grow together, and you can benefit from that in turn. So if you're ready to go to GroCycle.com/substrate, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks a lot for watching.